All right. Welcome, everybody, to WPS201, Architecting Large-Scale Migrations with Fannie Mae and the NRO. My name is Bobby Hallahan, and I'm a solution architect here at AWS. All right, so what are we going to speak about today? While this is a 200-level session, because we're not going to make assumptions that you know everything about migrations and modernization, so we're going to take just a couple minutes, and we're going to cover migration and modernization patterns, right? Just some of the core, common, bread and butter stuff. Hopefully most of you know, but if you don't, you're going to learn something right away. From then, we're going to go into the application of well-architected principles, and we're going to talk a little bit about that and how it applies to migration and modernization. And what you'll find throughout today's discussion is there's going to be a theme of well-architected. And it's something that I heavily wanted to speak about today because it's a kind of a unifying or underlying principle, right? No matter how you do migrations, especially when they're large scale, being able to fall back on those well-architected principles of like how we do distributed compute well is just core to all of this, right? It almost underpins it and connects it all together. So today we have two customer stories, right? The first from the National Reconnaissance Office, or the NRO. We'll talk about a large-scale migration for a zero-fail mission. Next, we'll then speak with Fannie Mae, who went and redefined and transformed how they do financial forecasting. They were able to take a process that took well over 80 days and bring that into the realm of just a few dozen hours, like 72 hours, like something crazy compression of that. And then throughout the session, we're going to talk about things that you can do today, right? So during these big migrations, right, obviously there's lessons learned. This isn't just going to be a, that's all, rainbows and sunshine, right? There's going to be, things are hard. There are challenges when doing these migrations. And we're going to speak about some of that today. We're going to speak about lessons learned, and we're really going to get in there. So without further ado, let's talk about some common migration and modernization patterns. So maybe some of us may be familiar with this type of graph. Hopefully a few people have seen it before, right? We talk about why migrate, right? And in terms of the value proposition, it's really, as you migrate and modernize, your cost of compute goes down. However, the innovation velocity, how fast you're able to move as an organization, how quickly you can innovate, is going to go up. So generally speaking, right, if you think about going from on-premises to rehosting, Amazon EC2 optimized, maybe you're going into serverless compute or cloud-native computing. Because of that, you're going to be able to move much faster, right? However, and then if we take this one level deeper, right, and another kind of common pattern for just migration, modernization, this type of thing is, and you may have heard this before, we call it the 7 R's of migration, right? So we'll cover them really quickly, which is rehost, relocate, repurchase, retain, retire, replatform, and refactor. In today's talk, we're actually going to cover, I think just about every one of these will be covered to some extent, right? So pay attention for that. I would say maybe commit 7 things to memory for the next 60 minutes. Maybe that's not a fair ask, but just note, right, we will be covering a few of these. But let's say, what if we're just starting, right? I don't know when should I replatform? When should I retain? When should I retire? How do I make those decisions? If anyone here is in this room today and you're thinking about doing a migration, you're in the process of a migration, and you're not doing it necessarily in a very structured way in terms of how you're making decisions, and you don't necessarily know where to start, there is one thing I would suggest, right, which is taking a look at a migration readiness assessment, or MRA. And what this is a process, I guess is a fair way to say it, that is going to give you preparation, understanding of the types of things you need to migrate. There's going to be workshops, assessment, and outcome focused, essentially to give you a plan so you know, hey, of those 7 R's, which ones should we really look at, what's going to be most impactful for us. And this is something your account team can help you deliver today. Now, in terms of tooling for migration, right? And we're still covering, this is still kind of bread and butter basics, but we're still going to talk about it because it's important. And we'll see that in our assess, mobilize, and then manage and migrate and modernize. What you'll find is, variety of different tooling here. For example, in assess, you can see we have right there the migration readiness assessment. But a couple call-outs I'll make, especially if you're starting with your migration journey, is Application discovery service is great. You need to understand what exists on premises. You need to understand what exists there. But control tower or landing zones, right? Having some sort of essentially, we call them, call it account vending machines, some way to be able to provision accounts in a structured manner. It's like you just need that if you're going to migrate, right? And IMS, maybe I'll even do like a poll of the audience, right? Like how many people use like automation for account provisioning today? A few? Okay. How many people in the room are actually in the process of doing a migration? A few? Okay, awesome. All right, so we're in the right place. That's really good. That's really good. We're in the right place. The one thing I would say, right, is to be successful in your migrations, you need to have some sort of automation in place, right? That's going to help you enforce compliance. It's going to help you enforce and standardize governance. And in the long run, right, this is one of those things where, it's going to be probably a little bit of work to set up, but it's something that's going to pay off in full, like tenfold later, because you can just, push out these accounts as often as fast as you'd like to. And then it gives you that type of, delineation between different workloads, right? So it's, the question of how many accounts do we use becomes a lot easier because it's not a huge lift to actually start provisioning new things. And then on the migrate and modernize standpoint, right, we have things like Snowball, Kinesis Firehose, Direct Connect of like, okay, how are we effectively able to connect our on-premises workloads into the cloud, right? Because a lot of times when we migrate, there are things where it's like, hey, some stuff's going to work on AWS, but it still needs to be able to talk to something in our data centers, right? So being able to have that well-established communication is important. So, right, this all sounds pretty easy, right? Why doesn't everybody do it? Or I guess obviously, right, there are some challenges here, right? And a lot of times we see customer challenges come out with things like having diverse infrastructure and operating system types, right? Maybe even legacy operating system types or legacy applications, complex databases, compatibility issues, right? Or even thinking about like if we're an organization and we don't operate in the cloud today, like do I have a workforce? Is my workforce even specialized, or do we have that corpus of knowledge within our employees or our organization to actually effectively migrate and perform this transformation? And then, of course, right, tight budgets and timelines, right? We say, okay, we'll move to the cloud, great. But you're probably not going to get more budget to do it. So that's always going to be a constraint. And throughout today's talk, we will, once again, that's something I'm going to ask you to kind of pay attention to, right? There's some challenges here, but we're going to cover some more challenges in our customer stories. And I'd really, really like us to really focus on like what we did to overcome them, and like think about how you can apply that today, right? Because I think that's really, if we like what's like the real heart and core and story of this session, it's it's not just to tell a good story that, okay, yeah, they migrated, great, right? Awesome outcomes. But how can you apply those lessons learned today? I think that's really what you're going to get out of today's session. So, outside of just the migration and modernization patterns, next I want to speak very briefly on the application of well-architected in this domain, right? So we see how many pillars of the well-architected review do we have, right? We have operational excellence, security, reliability, performance and efficiency, cost optimization, and sustainability. And just when we went through those 7 R's, right? Like, well-architected is just, it's like bread and butter distributed compute, right? And throughout this session, you'll also see that in some cases, even as a solution architect, when I work with my customers and we do well-architected reviews, one of the first questions I ask is like, okay, well, of these pillars, right? Not one is more important than the other, but which ones are more important to you as an organization? For this workload, for this application, does it need to be reliable? Is that super important? Or maybe it has to be very cost effective. In many of these stories, we'll find that operational excellence, right? Reliability is very important. Of course, we all see security that's like job zero for everybody, right? I would say even argue that's probably, you would elevate that. Or at least personally, I think I like to elevate security to think it's not necessarily more important than the other pillars, but we all know security is of paramount importance. However, in some organizations, they have a very mature security posture, right? Maybe there's a lot of stuff maybe as an application team, I don't necessarily need to worry about as much of security because a lot of it's managed. We're very advanced. There's not as much help I'm going to get out of it as I would if we could then focus on like cost optimization or reliability, right? So never that one's more important than the other. What we want to think about is like where can we get the most outcomes? And then when we think about this in the lens of migration, don't necessarily get caught up on the fact of like, okay, are we retiring, retaining, replatforming, or rehosting? You also want to make sure that you're focusing on these core principles. I want to reflect back on this specific slide here, right, where we talk about, ask the hypothetical, what happens, right, after we migrate, and what happens after we, essentially almost fully modernize, and we're at the very end of that, the very end of that axis, right, where you have like big innovation velocity, right? Like, what does that look like? But also, like, even after that, you're still going to have a similar set of challenges. You're still, like, maybe if you're a startup, right, like, you won't have to deal with legacy tech, but I imagine most people in this room, there's going to be tech debt. There always will be, right? You're always going to be dealing with some of these challenges. And something I guess I would say in terms of, what's one thing, or like the single biggest thing that you could do to make sure that you're successful in these migrations, right? And like, what's one good, I guess, signal, right, that you are actively modernizing and you're doing well in this, is that you have established some sort of like cloud center of excellence, right? You can call them whatever you want, right? But essentially what it is, it's going to be a team from across different dimensions of your organization, right? So from lead cloud architects, infrastructure cloud engineers, security engineers, operations engineers, and then you see your software engineers, right? So you're bringing in people from various different parts of your organization to build that center of excellence. And essentially what that is doing is you're building that in-house expertise where you can take lessons learned, apply them across the organization. And of course, I believe both of our stories today our customers have implemented CCOEs or cloud centers of excellence, and I would go as far to argue is that having these centers of excellence help accelerate innovation velocity. So if you don't have one established, think about establishing that within your own organization. Now you may ask, it's like, okay, how formal do we want to make it, right? That's really up to you, right? These can be informal groups. They can be very formalized. It's really based on how you want to do in your organization. Like personally, I don't think it should be very formal, right? But there should be some sort of structure around it to make sure that you can't just have like a bunch of people that care about the cloud, right? Because one of my favorite quotes is like, good intentions don't get things done, like mechanisms do. So you do have to have like some sort of process around that, right? Okay, so without further ado, I want to introduce Sridevi on stage from Fannie Mae, who's going to walk us through this enterprise transformation that they're able to do.
Thanks, Bobby. Let me start off with a question. How many of you here, with a show of hands, how many of you here had to modernize a process that's been around for decades? Don't be shy. All right, that was us at Fannie Mae too. Today, I'm going to talk about our unprecedented journey to transform financial forecasting. It wasn't about, for us, the modernization wasn't just about upgrading technology. It was reimagining how we forecast, collaborate differently, and make decisions with increased confidence in our data. My name is Sridevi Mullapudi. I'm the Vice President for Finance Technology at Fannie Mae. When I was first asked to lead this initiative, the mandate was to build a cost-effective and scalable platform that can meet both the current and future forecasting needs. Sounded simple and straightforward, isn't it? I thought so too. But the more I learned about the program, I realized that we didn't have to solve for the three typical dimensions, people, process, technology. We also had to solve for a fourth dimension, governance, all in a single go. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about our approach, the strategic choices we made, the lessons we have learned, both successes and stumbles, and the tangible results we are already seeing. But most importantly, I also plan to share with you some insights that I hope are valuable to your own transformation journeys. So let's get started. First, a little bit about Fannie Mae. Fannie Mae was founded in 1938 and is chartered by US Congress to advance home ownership and promote affordable housing all across United States. We are headquartered in DC and are considered as the single largest player in the secondary mortgage market. What does that really mean? So consider us as the bank for the banks. So Fannie Mae purchases home loans from lenders, that is banks, converts them into mortgage-backed securities and sells those to investors. And this process creates liquidity for the lenders to offer new home loans, thereby increasing the home ownership and rental housing, again, in all of United States. So just in the first 9 months of 2025 alone, Fannie Mae has provided about $287 billion worth of liquidity to support 1.1 million households to either purchase, rent, or refinance a home. So you may also know that US housing economy contributes up to 16% of nation's GDP. And with Fannie Mae being the cornerstone of that housing market to provide liquidity and stability, it is vital that we continue to assess and strengthen the financial future of the organization. Hence the need for financial forecasting. But you might ask me, what's financial forecasting? In its simplest form, it's the use of current and past financial data to predict the financial future. This is how we guide our business, plan our business, guide our stakeholders, and also meet the regulatory demand. So as part of this process, we have to do tests on a periodic basis to simulate the micro and macroeconomic conditions of the market, which are called stress tests, right? But unlike banks, our stress tests are actually set by FHFA, our regulator, and not the Fed Reserve. So our process is unique and the stakes are high. But why was this a hard thing to do? So let me paint a picture. Imagine a world of spreadsheets, data silos, and manual processes. That was our reality at Fannie Mae, right? And for us, this process did work well for many years, and it let us prioritize on other things that were important to us. But we quickly realized that it was limiting our ability to provide forward-looking insights to our stakeholders. That is, again, critical in an increasingly complex environment. In addition to the manual processes, we also had fragmented technology and at one point too many technologies, which was increasing our maintenance costs. We also had software that was running on-prem data centers with end-of-life infrastructure. Our subject matter experts were spread thin across the enterprise and siloed. So as a result of all of these, we had significant operational challenges that were only amplified by heavy customizations that we've made. So to solve for these challenges, we initiated the Forecast Transformation Program back in September of 2023. And we set ourselves some very bold goals, right? The first and foremost being we needed the platform to be fast. We needed to reduce the forecasting lifecycle from about 80 to 10 days, right? We also wanted to run our stress tests in parallel. Running them sequentially was no longer an option. We also had to co-locate about 2,000 plus calculations that were spread across 80 different systems into a single unified platform, and we wanted to run our analytics on top of that calculated output. We knew to do these calculations, we had to have compute that could scale up and down based on the demand and accommodate complex workflows. And we had to do all of this with cost in mind. As you can see, the work was clearly cut out for us. So to address these requirements, we first chose AWS as our foundation, mainly because it offered a wide variety of both storage and database options, and they're one of the few vendors that could meet the Fannie Mae's strictest security guidelines. We also wanted to persist all of the data into a single domain, mainly because we were struggling with the data silos that was in the current ecosystem. We knew that we had to do these calculations on about 1.5 billion loan records. So we needed compute, and for that we chose EMR, Elastic MapReduce, as our main compute option. For orchestration, after a careful evaluation, we settled on step functions to stitch between the data services, models, and both the internal and external systems. We also consciously decided that we were going to integrate with upstream and downstream systems with minimal impact to them. And finally, we wanted to establish reusable frameworks, not only to accelerate our own development, but also to give back to the enterprise. Excuse me. So our process is actually very simple. We start off with a user interface. This is where our business community comes in, enters any of the inputs, and submits the scenarios for execution. Based on the type of scenario that they choose to execute, we go and source relevant data from multiple systems of records, and all of that is written to the data backbone. We then call upon the models, both existing and new ones that we created as part of this ecosystem, and the model output is also written to the data backbone. We then initiate a bunch of business calculations, and all of the calculated output is also returned to the backbone. And then we send off whatever is needed to the downstream systems, and we further prep these outputs for analytics, both for regulatory and user analytics. And for those of you who are interested in the tech details, our user interface is made up of Angular and Fargate. The orchestration, as I mentioned before, is nothing but a series of step functions that get initiated through an API whenever a job gets executed. Our calculation framework uses the EMR option that I talked about, and it then initiates the calculations that are written in YAML, yet another markup language. For us, this was our way to decouple the business logic from the application logic. And our backbone itself is made up of S3, and we used Aurora and DynamoDB for all of the metadata management. And the integrations were all done through APIs and SNS, and for analytics, we use SageMaker and Tableau. So far you've heard me talk about the genesis behind our transformation, the objectives, the process. So how did we do on our implementation? Well, we had our own share of stumbles. At one point, at its most active phase of the engagement, we had over 100 engineers on this project. And having them all consistently adhere to the guardrails and the best practices over a period of 2 years was really challenging. Consistency was also something that we had to deal with when we were integrating with about 76 integration points across the ecosystem. As I mentioned to you before, this platform was going to be used for both regulatory demands, but also for our data science community that needed that flexibility. So finding that balance to two different ends of the spectrum was also a challenge that we had to overcome. And every scenario that we were executing was generating about 500 terabytes of data. So we had to find very quickly the right archival strategy because our storage costs were going up if we couldn't solve for that puzzle. And then because we were doing these calculations on big data volumes, we knew we needed multiple EMR clusters. But then we also had to find ways to minimize the cross-AZ traffic, cross-availability zone traffic, to reduce for latency, and also the cost optimization. And for the same reason, we also needed to figure out how to solve for the limits, whether it's an S3, Lambda, account limits. We were running into these limits all the time. So we had to solve for that challenge as well. So this is where our partnership with AWS became critical because they helped us solve for many of these challenges that I just talked about. So we started our engagement with AWS in August of 2024. And we had done a series of deep dives and workshops with them. AWS was able to bring in their specialists mainly for compute and databases. And through the deep dives and workshops, we have been able to iterate and refine our solutions. So in addition to the deep dives, we also leveraged AWS well-architected framework to assess our foundation. For us, we specifically focused on cost, performance, and reliability. For us, cost optimization was not just a technical goal, it was a business imperative. So we had to use AWS services like Redshift Spectrum and S3 partitioning. But also, we created our own real-time cost monitoring framework. But my personal favorite was to show the cost of the scenario right on the UI before the user even clicks on the submit button so that they know what kind of a bill they would get at the end of that execution. And to solve for flexibility and high availability, we leveraged EMR's instance fleets, which gives you an option of mix and match between different instance types and different processors. So you could choose between an Intel or an AMD or a Graviton processor based on the type of workload you are dealing with. And then on proactive capacity management, we raised account limits. We worked with AWS to raise our account quotas. And we had used S3 pre-partitioning to support our throughput of 20 million transactions per second. So every bit of work that we have done to refine our architecture was to make the lives of our business community a bit easier. So as a result of the work that we had done, we have been able to reduce the cost by 39%, and then the execution time almost by 70%. So to recap, so did we meet our objective of accelerating the forecast and also simplifying our ecosystem? I would say absolutely yes, because we have been able to reduce our manual processes by about 60%. We have reduced our system execution from 20 to 3 days. And we are now able to run a forecast that for 36 million loan records for every scenario, and we can run up to 20 plus scenarios in a month. Prior to this, we could only run our forecast for a book of 1.4 million loans or so. So we have been able to provide a modular and auditable platform that supports rapid innovation. While this platform did take about 15 squads to develop and design, We only now need about 2 squads to support it on an ongoing basis. And just for reference, a squad could have between 6 to 8 engineers. So while we did deliver on the initial phase of the program, we are continuing to work to refine our advanced analytics and introduce Gen AI capabilities. We also want to extend this platform to the 2 different business lines, our multifamily and capital markets. And of course, we are actively socializing the reusable frameworks we created for adoption across the enterprise. So as I conclude today's session, let me share with you a few insights that transcend technology. One, the first one being, modernizations like these are marathons, not just sprints. So please continue to enjoy all the wins, right? Celebrate all the wins, whether they are big or small. Technology is just an enabler. People drive the success, so continue to invest in your teams. And data quality should be non-negotiable. We not only consolidated all of the data into a single domain, but we applied data governance on top of that data from day one. So as a result, we are now quickly able to build out our Gen AI capabilities. And finally, I would also say that always start with a business problem and not just technology. For us, that was a big theme. I forgot to add one thing, is embracing agility. That was the recipe for success. So the iterative work that we had done with AWS or even with our product and business teams helped us in this engagement. So as you think about your own transformations, what are the outcomes you would like to achieve? For us, it was not just about better forecast. It was about better decision enabling. And Fannie Mae's journey is obviously not finished. It's ongoing. But we have set the foundation to forecast with greater accuracy and lead with increasing confidence. And that is going to serve us and the housing market we support for years to come. So thank you for your time. I hope you found the information helpful. Please do take a little bit of time to complete the survey and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.